Okay, so we're diving into this The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, and it's a classic, obviously, for a reason. And it seems like you're really interested in how it can help us find more peace and be more present, especially in our everyday lives. So what's grabbing you about it?
What I find really interesting about Tolle is, he's very direct and practical in his approach.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not trying to push any dogma. He's just giving us like a guide to experience a deeper reality.
Yeah.
And he's speaking from his own really profound personal change, right?
Yeah, totally. And he's not all talk. There's that story about his big awakening where a bird's chirp suddenly sounded like a diamond to him. And even just the light coming through his curtains was like pure love. It's intense. And then he's hanging out on park benches for 2 years, just filled with joy. I mean, it makes you wonder what actually shifted for him so deeply.
It's that lived experience that makes his ideas so powerful.
Yep.
You highlighted some parts about how our minds can pull us away from the present moment. So I'm curious, what resonates most with you about that idea of you are not your mind?
Oh man, that's huge, right? I think so many of us feel this constant tug of war between who we really are deep down and all that mental chatter going on up there. And Tolle really separates those two things. There's pure consciousness and then there's the egoic mind, which is all about the overthinking, resisting what is, and getting us hooked on things that don't even last.
And it's that identifying with the ego, with those fleeting things that he says causes so much suffering.
Right.
He makes this great analogy of the mind being like a dog with a bone. It's obsessed, won't let go, but it's not getting any actual nourishment from it.
Oh, totally. So we need to figure out how to get that bone away from the dog. Okay, but seriously, how do we actually start to experience the power of now? Tolle talks about how the mind just loves to dwell on problems. So how do we shift gears out of that?
Well, the first step is just recognizing that pattern. Noticing when we're stuck in that loop of thinking about problems without actually getting anywhere. And then it's about making a conscious choice to shift our attention.
Which is way easier said than done. Our minds are basically wired for analyzing, worrying, fantasizing. It's our default setting.
It is. He's not sugarcoating it. It's tough. And that's where his idea of the pain body comes in. It's this buildup of all our past emotional pain, and it can trap us in these negative cycles.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting for me. So the pain body is this shadow self holding on to all the old hurts and then using them to trigger us. Have you noticed that in your own life? Something small happens, but it sets off a way bigger emotional reaction than you'd expect.
Yeah, it's like that saying, hurt people, right?
Okay.
It's often the pain body at work trying to keep those old wounds alive. But the good news is we don't have to let it run the show. Tolle says awareness is key. Just noticing the pain body, without judgment, can start to disarm it.
So instead of getting totally caught up in that anger, insecurity, resentment, whatever it is, we just observe it with detachment.
Exactly. Recognizing, okay, this is my pain body reacting.
Yeah.
Instead of getting completely swept away by it. And this actually connects to a really important distinction that Tolle makes. The difference between our life situation and our life.
Okay, unpack that for us. What's the difference?
So it's your life situation is, all the stuff your mind usually gets hung up on, the to-do list, the problems, the shoulda, woulda, couldas, all that. But your actual life, that's happening right here, right now. Are you actually present for it, or are you just lost in thought?
Whoa, that is actually super helpful. It's so easy to get completely swept up in all that mental noise and forget to just actually experience the present moment.
And that's where Tolle says real joy and peace come from. Not some, idealized future, but right here, right now.
Okay, I'm with you so far. But how do we actually get there? What are some practical things we can do to shift into that present moment awareness?
He talks about these things he calls portals to the unmanifested. They're basically practices that help us quiet the mind and connect with a deeper reality. You actually highlighted a bunch of them in your notes.
Yeah, I'm all about those practical tools. So break it down for us. What are some of these portals to the unmanifested and how do they work?
One of the most powerful ones is actually super simple. Just becoming aware of our breath.
Okay.
It sounds so basic, but consciously tuning into, the feeling of each inhale and exhale can be really grounding.
So we're talking about regular old breathing, right?
Yeah.
The thing we do all day without even thinking about it.
Exactly. You're not trying to change your breath. Just bring awareness to it. And the beauty is it's something you can do anytime, anywhere. Another powerful portal Tolle talks about is nature observation.
Oh, yeah, that totally makes sense. There's just something so grounding about being in nature. Like, your problems seem smaller when you're surrounded by the ocean or in a quiet forest.
Oh.
What is it about nature that makes it such a powerful portal, though?
It's not just about the beauty, although that's definitely part of it. It's the aliveness. When we observe nature, with a sense of presence, we can almost feel that life force that's like animating everything. Tolle even talks about how watching a plant or an animal can teach us about accepting what is, about surrendering to the now.
Oh, yeah, he compares it to living with Zen masters, right? Like he says he's learned as much from watching cats and ducks as he has from any spiritual text, especially ducks.
Right.
He talks about how they'll have these little spats and then they just like swim off, flap their wings a few times. And it's like the whole thing never happened. No grudges, no dwelling, just back to being present.
It's a great analogy for how we can approach challenging situations in our own lives.
Mm.
Imagine when someone says something hurtful, you let it pass through you like a gentle breeze. No resistance.
Way easier said than done. But I see what you're saying. It's like there's no one there to be hurt anymore. We become like invulnerable. So forgiveness is really about like taking back our power.
Exactly. Forgiving doesn't mean you're condoning bad behavior, but it means you're refusing to let someone else control your inner state. And it's not just nature. Tolle also talks a lot about the body as a portal, too.
Which is interesting because like a lot of spiritual traditions have actually seen the body as an obstacle to enlightenment.
Right. The body often gets a bad rap. But Tolle, he challenges that. He says the body isn't the enemy. It's actually a gateway to experiencing the fullness of being.
Okay, I'm curious. What does he mean by that? How can we experience like the fullness of being through the body?
He encourages us to pay attention to the sensations of the body, to feel that inner energy field, what he calls qi. He even describes this practice of like withdrawing your attention from the outside world and just focusing it completely on the inner body.
And what happens when we do that? Like, do we achieve enlightenment?
It can be a powerful form of meditation, yeah. But Tolle isn't saying we should all become hermits, shut ourselves off from the world. He wants us to bring that same awareness into our everyday lives.
To keep that portal open no matter what we're doing.
Exactly. There's a quote, he says, as you go about your life, don't give 100% of your attention to the external world and to your mind. Keep some within. Feel the inner body even when engaged in everyday activities, especially when engaged in relationships or when you are relating with nature. Feel the stillness deep inside it. Keep the portal open. He also has some, pretty radical things to say about suffering. He actually suggests that all suffering is ultimately an illusion.
Whoa, that's a bold statement, but I think I get what he's getting at. It's not that the pain isn't real. It's that, like, it's not the whole story, right?
Right. He compares the world we perceive to like an image in a dream. It's just how our consciousness is interpreting the energy of the universe at this moment. And there are infinite interpretations possible.
That reminds me of that Buddhist teaching, all that arises passes away. In fact, Tolle tells that story about the monk who says everything he learned in 20 years could be summed up in one sentence. All that arises passes away. This I know.
Yeah, and then Tolle adds to that. He says, what he meant, of course, was this. I have learned to offer no resistance to what is. I have learned to allow the present moment to be and to accept the impermanent nature of all things and conditions.
Yeah.
Thus have I found peace.
Thus have I found peace. That's beautiful. And it speaks to finding peace even in the middle of all the constant change that like defines our existence, right?
Yeah.
Which brings us to surrender, something Tolle talks about a lot. It's not about giving up though, right? It's more about like aligning ourselves with the flow of life.
Exactly. Surrender is about letting go of that need to control everything and just trusting in the intelligence of life itself.
So we're like letting go of the reins a little bit, trusting that things will work out as they should. But doesn't that kind of contradict like the idea of taking action and making positive changes in our lives? Can we surrender and still be proactive?
Absolutely. It's not either. Tully actually believes that surrender makes our actions more powerful, not less.
So we're not just like becoming passive. It's more about like aligning our actions with some deeper wisdom, changing from the inside out, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Tully says that when you surrender, a totally different energy, a different quality flows into your doing. You're not forcing, you're flowing.
That makes a lot of sense. So you're acting from this place of alignment, not just reacting to whatever's happening around you. But how do we actually practice this surrender thing? It sounds amazing, but life is messy.
It all starts with acceptance. Accepting this present moment exactly as it is. We don't have to change it, fix it, or even like, judge it.
Which, let's be honest, is often the hardest part, right?
Yeah.
Just saying yes to life even when it's tough.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But Tolle says this acceptance, this surrender, it actually allows a whole deeper dimension of reality to open up to us. He calls it an abiding presence, an unchanging deep stillness, an uncaused joy beyond good and bad.
It's like finding this joy that doesn't depend on things going a certain way. Like peace and joy become your default setting no matter what's going on externally.
Exactly. That's the power of now. Tolle says when we're not clinging to things outside ourselves to be happy, our lives often change for the better, almost like a side effect. It's like we let go of the struggle and things just start falling into place.
Mhm.
And he says this applies to our relationships too.
Oh, yeah. Relationships can be like a breeding ground for ego drama.
Right? He's saying if we can't accept this present moment as it is, we can't fully accept anyone else as they are either. We'll just keep trying to change them, fix them, judge them. You know,
Right, right.
it all starts with accepting ourselves, accepting this moment.
Totally. And it's like when we're so busy focusing on some future goal or some like ideal version of someone, we totally miss the beauty of who they actually are right now.
Exactly. And that's how we end up in relationships that just don't work. Tolle believes that when we surrender, our relationships actually transform. Because we're no longer trying to get something from the other person, we can actually just be present with them,
Yeah.
just appreciate them for who they are at their core.
It's like connecting with their essence instead of getting caught up in their actions or their flaws.
Yeah, and he even suggests that when we're really grounded in our own being, we start to perceive that same essence in other people, even when they're acting out.
Wow, so we're able to like see past the ego's defenses and actually connect on this deeper level.
He says it can be incredibly healing because it can actually awaken that same sense of being in the other person too. We're not just relating to their personality, but to their soul.
That's amazing. We've covered so much ground. We talked about quieting the mind, connecting with the present moment, embracing surrender. But there's one thing we haven't really unpacked yet, and that's this idea of the unmanifested. Tolle talks about it as like this realm that's beyond our thoughts, beyond our perceptions even. But like, how do we even begin to wrap our heads around something that's by definition beyond comprehension?
It is tricky. He uses this analogy of space, which I find helpful. He says, space has no existence. To exist literally means to stand out. You cannot understand space because it doesn't stand out. Although in itself it has no existence, it enables everything else to exist.
Okay, so space is like the container, but it's not actually a thing in and of itself. It's like the background that allows everything else to be.
Exactly. And he says silence, stillness, the unmanifested, Karo, they're all kind of like that. They're not things to be grasped with the mind, but they're the very ground of all existence.
It's like trying to like grab hold of water. The tighter you squeeze, the less you actually have. So how do we connect with something so like elusive?
Tolle talks about practices like conscious breathing, being in nature, even that feeling of spaciousness you can access when you shift your attention away from thought. They all kind of point to that same stillness inside.
He even mentions like death as a portal to the unmanifested, right?
Yeah, he describes this radiant light that people often talk about with near-death experiences. But he says that unless we've already, touched into that dimension of no self while we're alive, we might not even recognize it when we see it. We might even turn away from it out of fear.
So it's about getting familiar with that inner spaciousness now in this life, not waiting for some future event, whether it's death or enlightenment or
Right.
whatever. It's about tapping into the power of now, which is, I mean, that's what this whole book is about, right?
It really is. And he even suggests that, if all of our negativity is a form of psychic pollution, then maybe, just maybe, embracing the power of now is our best hope for creating a more conscious, more peaceful world. He actually believes that our individual transformations can ripple outward and create a global shift.
So it's not just about personal peace, it's about the fate of humanity. That's a pretty radical idea, that our own states of consciousness could impact the whole planet. What do you think? Could embracing the power of now be the key to a brighter future for everyone? Something to think about.